We're a month into lockdown here in the UK, and it's fair to say that we're learning a good few lessons. The first of those is stash building is clearly an asset. All of those who questioned our stash building skills in advance of this pandemic, I hope they are suitably rebuffed. The second thing that we've learned is that even the most introverted amongst us can occasionally long to go outside and, socialise a little bit. Zoom, house party, whichever platform you happen to be using, it's a wonderful means of keeping up with friends. Doesn't quite scratch the same itch as, going out for coffee and cake or nipping down to the local pub. And the third thing that we've learned is that in a post-pandemic world, strong white bread flour will be the new currency, and those of you who are smugly making your sourdoughs, just rest assured knowing that you're essentially the new elite. How's that feel? I mean, probably pretty good. Why is there no flour? Hello there pickles, and welcome to episode 43 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name's Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I'm a knitter living here in West London, where there is no strong white bread flour to be found in indeed any vicinity unless you're willing to get up at 6 a.m. and no. Not okay with this. But yes, I'm a knitter living here in West London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a huge hello and welcome to you. I do like to give you a little word of warning up front, which is, aside from the occasional whinging about, truly first world problems, there is also a little bit of swearing that happens on this podcast. Yes, we are swearing friendly over here. We do use occasional curse words, swear words, and just generally colourful language. If that's not your bag, I totally appreciate it. This will not be the podcast for you, but if you are a returning viewer, I am delighted to have you back, and I really do hope you are safe, healthy, and well. We're coming towards the end of April, and indeed it's a little bit warm and toasty over here in London town. The sun is out and has been shining for the last few weekends. We had a bank holiday weekend a couple of weekends ago. We have a couple more of them coming up. I am also coming to the end of my holiday budget that I have at work, and partly because my trip to the US was cut short, and partly because I apparently have been working like a bit of a maniac. I have a good few days remaining now. As part of the lockdown, the government have announced a change in holiday policy. I'm now able to carry over more days, should I wish to, into my next year's holiday allowance. But actually, for all that it seems entirely arbitrary, I'm quite enjoying the occasional little 3-day weekend. This is actually being cheekily filmed on a Friday because I've taken the day off today. I'll still be putting this up slightly later over the weekend. Gives me time to edit and do all the fun stuff that I need to. But yes, it does mean that I'm enjoying a few more 3-day weekends, which, given I can't really leave the house or go out and visit friends or travel and see bits of the UK that I'd normally like to do on an extended weekend, I'm still kind of enjoying the time off. It's weird, but true. So there we go. The good news is lockdown seems to have done some rather good things to my knitting mojo, for all that the weather, in all of its kind of general sunshineness, would seek to undermine that. Actually, we're doing not too badly. But yes, for those of you who are still in absolute peak lockdown at this point in time, whenever you happen to be watching this, I think we can all agree it's getting a little bit tired and stale now. We're definitely done with, just the sheer monotony of it all. I do find that my days and weeks are kind of blurring together a little bit. I'm not entirely sure how many weeks of lockdown we've gone through so far, but here we very much are. But of course, the main thing is that if you are either perhaps not able to work, you're furloughed from work, or indeed you are spending your time working from home, that you are staying home, staying healthy, and that those around you and your loved ones are likewise. So if indeed you're a key worker, someone who's out in the front line, a massive thank you from all of us to you for really just continuing to do that incredible work. But in the meantime, we'll crack on with the core podcast content. As ever, you'll be able to find show notes for this week's episode in the description box below, as well as over on our Ravelry group, where we have the Knitting Vicariously podcast group. You can search for it in the groups tab on Ravelry. There you'll find not only extended show notes for each and every episode, but also a number of different active threads with folks talking about everything from patterns that they're vicariously knitting, yarns that they have in mind, questions and help with specific patterns, or just advice about the sorts of things that you might be wanting to knit. Thank you as ever to everybody who goes over there, who takes part in the conversation. I really do appreciate it. And as ever, a massive thank you to our wonderful moderator, Yelena, who is an absolute diamond. In addition to Ravelry, you'll also be able to find some show notes over at the Knitting Vicariously podcast account on Instagram. So if you follow at Knitting Vicariously, for each episode you'll see a post where I include the relevant links, hashtags and makers in there as well. So let's get into the core podcast content. I will confess, I am not wearing any knitwear today. I'm not even wearing any knitwear themed items today, and that is because, again, with the warmness, the toastiness, generally it just wasn't going to happen. It's quite cozy. But aside from that, I also do not have any finished objects to show you this week, although, in spite of that, I have been on a little bit of a knitting roll in the sense that I have finished both the sleeves and the body of a sweater. I know. I mean, would help if it were the same sweater, but them's the breaks. Anyway, the first whip that I'm going to show you this week is my Sorrel pullover. I'll include the pattern picture here, although I'm fairly sure you're all pretty familiar with it already. This is the Sorrel. It is by Wool and Pine, who are Dank Fibre and Abby's Knits, over on Instagram. It's a beautiful pattern. You will have seen it around by now, I am quite sure, if you haven't already seen me working on my version here. My version here is in the customary colour palette of my preference, which for those of you who are uninitiated is a very broad definition of the colour spectrum that I like to refer to as gold. It ranges from your kind of yellows all the way through your coppers and your bronzes into kind of cinder toffee camps. Some would call it brown. Those people, I'm sure, do not watch the podcast, for they know they shall be ridiculed and pointed at. Yes? Good. Delightful. Anyway, this is my Sorrel pullover, and as you will be able to see, I finished the body. Yes, I have. In fact, you can't quite see it there because it's rolled up and under, but yes, there is the ribbing. I have finished the body of this sweater. It is, I'm loving how this is working up. And look, I'm also incredibly pleased with the fade because, yes, this has been faded. The yarns that I have used, let me see if I can just weave those ends out the way. The yarns that I've used from top to bottom are up here at the yoke, we have Ushatita in the Coral Reef colourway, and this is paired throughout. This beautiful golden mohair is Stranded Dyeworks mohair silk in her caramel colourway, which I'll show you in the skein in a second, for it is beautiful. Moving down the body of the sweater, as we start to get into this middle section here, I started alternating the Ushatita Coral Reef with Wild Honey. It might actually just be called Coral, I think, the Ushatita colourway. Wild Honey is next up. Then as I go a little bit further down, you'll be able to see it start to fade into another beautiful singles base. This time it is Woolen Vines Nouveau in Pumpkin Kombucha, which is a beautiful, broadly speaking, sort of golden orange colourway with some speckles of darker colours in there too. And then right at the bottom, hopefully you can see this, yes you can, and a lot of my armpit, sorry about that. We have Lamb Strings Rooibos on her Sadie Singles base. And yeah, really happy with how this fade took place. It's really evenly kind of worked through, and all in all, very much in love with it. So I've actually been able to be fairly organised for once and have the different yarns that I've used for this here so that I can hold them up for you to see. So from, well, my left to right, your right to left, maybe? No, this one is the first colorway that I used, and again, this is Ushatita in, I think it is just coral rather than coral reef. The next one that we have along here, so this one here is Wild Honey, which as you can see is again golden and beautifully speckled. This one that we have sandwiched in here is the Pumpkin Kombucha by Vine, and then last but not least at the far end here we have Rooibos by Lambstrings on her Sadie Singles base. And last but not least is the Stranded Dyeworks yarn that I mentioned, her mohair silk base in Caramel, the absolute perfect golden accompaniment to those other skeins. It is just, the depth of colour in this is astonishing. I love it so, so much. So yes, there you have it. These are the yarns that I've been using for my Sorrel, and I should have more than enough to get this finished. I've got at least one more skein of the mohair silk, and although mohair silk as a base goes a very, very long way, and certainly the remainders that I've got here should be more than enough for me to get those sleeves done. All I need to do is really just crank out the sleeves. I have tried on the body, it fits. It comes to pretty much bang on my high hip, which is my personal preference. I am hoping it's going to loosen up a tiny bit with blocking. It's fair to say that either my quarantine gauge has perhaps been a little bit tight, or far more likely my quarantine me is perhaps a smidge bigger than pre-quarantine me. Because, you know, we've all been loafing around a little bit, and it's quite hard to get our arses off the sofa and outside when we're told, you know, you can go outside, but there's restrictions in place, and you think, well, you know, okay, well, I could go outside and literally take lives in my hands, or I could stay in here and watch another episode of something on Netflix. So, you know, it's better for humanity all round, really, I think. But yes, I have tried this on. I am otherwise pretty happy with it, my flippancy about general quarantine sizing notwithstanding, and I think I am a little bit hopeful that it grows slightly. I mean, otherwise it'll be close fitting. It's not too tight or anything like it. It's just, it's very negative ease at a point in time and a general point around about my waist where, you know, a tiny bit of ease wouldn't be the worst thing. I'm just saying. But yes, otherwise really, really happy with how this is progressing. I have been knitting this on a 3.75mm needle, which is a US size 5. I think for the ribbing, which is all twisted rib, as you can see, I went down to a 3.5mm needle, but other than that, it's all been fairly straightforward. I will just say right here and now that to cast off and bind off here at the bottom, which hopefully you can see, you'll see that it's twisted rib, but you may also be able to see the bind off that I have used here is my own personal favourite for ribbing, which is the Laurie's Twisty bind off. It is a bind off that I stumbled across years ago on YouTube. I find it absolutely brilliant for binding off 1x1 or 2x2 rib, or indeed any kind of rib. What it has you do is it has you add in an extra needle twist when you're binding off, in between moving from knitting to purl stitches and vice versa. And what that does is it adds in just a tiny bit of extra yarn to give you a little extra stretch in that bind off without risking flaring or any kind of excess yarn in that space, which is what I personally found when I did a little bit of the super stretchy bind off. So Laurie's Twisty bind off is my absolute favourite. I will link it in the show notes below in case you haven't had a chance to try it out for yourself. But for those of you who happen to love toe-up socks, this is definitely one that I would recommend you giving a try for the tops of your socks. Now, for those of you who watched the previous episode, I had a huge number of comments. Thank you to everyone who left me a message from people saying that similarly to myself, they were finding themselves knitting on conference calls and perhaps being able to knit while they were on video calls and just being able to take a little bit of the stress away, or people who'd done that historically, who knit in meetings, who used it as a bit of a means of being able to kind of be productive but also help them to focus. So Thank you so much to everyone who commented on that. I found it really, really interesting. I mentioned last time round, and the reason that this came up is because I had been knitting socks, which is very unlike me. And last time round, I showed you a pair of blueberry waffle socks that I had just cast on. I think it's fair to say that my plans for those have gone slightly awry because they are textured socks, and so for all that they didn't require much in the way of attention, it was still a little bit kind of, I'd need to look down and just check which row I was on. So I've made a little bit of progress on those, but not very much. Instead, what I decided that I would do is I would take that kind of need for constant motion, very little kind of need to look at a project and just kind of churning out those knit stitches on little diddy needles, and instead thought, do you know what I could do? Could knit sleeves, couldn't I, motherfucker? Yes, I could. So when I mentioned that I'd knit sleeves and the body of a jumper, yeah, those are not on the same things. No, they are not at all. Because the sleeves that I've been working on are attached to my Morning in Engelberg jumper. I will include a picture of that here on the screen just for your reference. This is a pattern, a wonderful pattern by Nadia Cretin-Lechen. This is a pattern that I've knit previously. I have a version in lovely golden brown colour, because of course I do, but I am making a couple of modifications to it this time round. As I mentioned last time, the main modification I have made is a folded over neckband. My only complaint that I have about this sweater with the previous version that I knit is that it is quite a wide boat neck, and so as such it tends to sit a little bit too widely for me to be able to comfortably wear tops underneath it without those showing. Therefore, I surmised that what I could do this time round is pop in a folded neckband, the likes of this, that would cinch it in a little bit as well as giving me a tiny bit more coverage. And so far, I'm really happy with how this is looking. And while I know my Sorrel pullover is the one that needs sleeves the most urgently, what I did think though was when it comes to knitting and knitting quite mindlessly, the one thing I'm very conscious of with Sorrel is that you are holding two yarns together. You're holding together the fingering weight singles with the lace mohair, and it's not entirely kind of TV knitting or something where you can take your attention away from it altogether, because the risk is that you catch one yarn but not both, and so because you're knitting it inside out, actually on the reverse side where it's reverse stockinette, you can see if there's a line where you have perhaps caught one yarn but missed the other. It can look quite obvious, so I tend to try and give that, sorry, hair and face, I do try and tend to give that a little bit more attention than perhaps I would usually do if I'm just knitting with one yarn. Therefore, when it comes to knitting DK weight yarn on little circular needles, I mean, that's pretty mindless. So here we are, we've managed 2 full sleeves, look at that. Yeah, I know. Now, fair to say there's still a bit of a way to go on the body. I could leave it as it is, but it would be a very different sort of sweater for a very different sort of occasion. I was trying to explain this to someone the other day that no, this isn't really a look that I'd go for. But the good news is that the sleeves are done. So as you can see, I have this beautiful cable that I've been continuing to knit on down the front. I also have my cable progress that is being willfully and wonderfully watched over by this little beauty. This is a unicorn progress keeper from my wonderful friend Hannah, who is the Corner of Craft. Her progress keepers are some of my absolute favourites. She hand beads them all herself, and it means that they're incredibly light and they don't weigh your knitting down. So again, when you're looking to keep tabs of where you are within a cable, or what I like to tend to do, all the words, none of the necessity. What I like to do and have a tendency to do is to use a progress keeper to mark the first stitch in a cable repeat pattern, and that way it's much easier for me to count the number of rows that I've done since then and know when I need to do the next cable. So yes, that is there. You can see it's on the front of this beautiful garter stitch panel with the stockinette sleeves on either side. The rear is also this garter stitch, so it's such a beautifully textured pattern, but similarly so simple to knit. But yeah, the sleeves themselves are completed in stockinette, so I was able to bash these out pretty darn quickly. So there are decreases along there. The decreases for my size were, I think, every 6 or so rows, and so as part of that it was fairly easy to crank through those. I added in an extra couple because I finished up decreasing every 6 rows to their required stitch count about here, but I like my sleeves to be a little bit more tapered around my wrists for all that I am fairly averagely sized overall. I've got quite skinny wrists, so I like something to be quite sort of flush and fitted around there. I also, to mimic and mirror the folded over neckband, I have also done the same thing with the cuffs here. So you will be able to see that I knit the cuff ribbing to double the required length. I then folded the top half of that back inside and then just did a 3 needle bind off. So I picked up the stitches for that first row of ribbing. I then folded this over and then did a 3 needle bind off with those two, just knit side or with knit stitches in that 3 needle bind off rather than knitting it in pattern, and it means that I've got a nice stretchy cuff. So that mirrors the folded neckband really nicely. I will also be doing a folded hem. Hem is the word that I'm looking for. Not just sound like I'm clearing my throat Umbridge style. Hem. No, this is the other sleeve, just to prove that there are two. But yeah, as I say, I find it really straightforward just to kind of go through and bosh these out as I go. The light is making it look as though there's a fairly distinct colour shift between the sort of first section of the sweater and where I picked up for the sleeves. I did alternate. I have alternated skeins throughout this sweater, but obviously when it comes to moving from partway through one skein to another skein, you're going to get a little bit of contrast. I can live with that. In all honesty, I'm entirely fine with it, and it's fair to say the camera is overexposing this colour a tiny bit, so the reality is once this is on and about my person, I imagine it'll be fairly hard to see. The yarn that I'm using for this sweater has been living in my stash for a little while now. It has been sitting just down here. In fact, that is the one remaining skein that I don't have caked up. I caked up 5 skeins of this yarn because my previous sweater took pretty much bang on 5 skeins of Madeline Tosh, and it is a limited edition base that they had a while back in their online shop, which is Madeline Tosh limited edition super soft DK. This means it's probably going to pill like a bit of a beast, if I'm honest. It's already showing a few little signs of wear, but at the same time it's a beautiful colour. It was in my stash and it was exactly what I wanted this sweater to be. The colourway I'm knitting this up in is Viridian as well, and as you can see it's a really lovely sort of deep green colour, and one that I'm very much enjoying at the moment. You can see I do quite like my greens as well as my golds, it's fair to say. For the most part, this has been knit on a 5mm needle, which is a US size 8. You can see that I'm continuing to use said 5mm needle. Oh, hello, that's done very strange things to the colour. On the body of the sweater now. I also used it in, it was either 16 or 12-inch circulars for the bulk of the sleeves, and then I just went down to 4.5mm needles, a US size 7, on a 9-inch circular, which is some centimetres, 20-ish centimetres, I think, maybe more, 40 centimetres, because 20 centimetres. It's weird. The UK, we have this kind of bastardised imperial metric system where I can tell you with a fair degree of confidence what 30 centimetres is, but I can also tell you with a fair degree of confidence how far a mile is. That's, you know, the sort of upbringing that I've had. Mixed up and just generally a little bit backward. But yes, so 9-inch circulars for the cuff on a 4.5mm needle, which is a US size 7. So yes, these are the sleeves that I've been working on in lieu of those socks in the short term, and there is a distinct possibility that between this and my Sorrel I will have a finished sweater to show off on the next podcast. It just remains to be seen if it's cold enough for me to be wearing the aforementioned sweater, or if I'm just going to be pointing at it and sweating gently at the side of the screen. So we'll see how we get on with that, but in the meantime, really enjoying working on this. But yes, for all that the weather is definitely changing at the moment and getting a little bit warmer, I clearly have sweaters on the brain, because having got to the point of finishing the body of one sweater and the sleeves of another, my brain essentially clicked into, well, you've basically finished a sweater. You should think about what you're going to cast on next, because my brain hates me and never wants me to finish anything. But it's fair to say I have been, you know, just gently pondering what I might knit next time round. And there's definitely a few contenders out there. Some of those I'm going to touch on when I talk about Vicarious knitting. But before I do that, there's been a little bit of stash acquisition for science, because I've been, you know, researching options. Not to say that this isn't in and of itself an excellent source of scientific research, thank you very much, but it's fair to say that kind of above and beyond this, there were a few things that I was just, you know, optioning and supporting small businesses and all that good stuff. Good, glad you're coming with me on this. One of the sweaters I mentioned a couple of episodes ago is still floating around gently in the back of my mind as a possible cast on. This is the pink velvet sweater by Andrea Mowry, who is Drea Renee Knits over on Instagram. I'll include the pattern picture here, although you may well be familiar with it already. It's a gorgeous colourwork sweater where the colourwork yoke portion of her design is knit in Suri alpaca. So rather than it being a like for like contrast colour, it's actually a different yarn base altogether, and it gives it this really nice, again, texture to it that I think is pretty special. Now, absolutely, you could go and do this with pretty much any pattern that's out there, but this particular pattern, the slightly geometric style to it, has definitely been playing around in my mind. Now, I have a couple of skeins of Suri alpaca and I was looking at some combinations, but you know, science, I needed to go out and look at some other options there too. Now, I have a few different colour thoughts as to how I would like this to go, and so there's part of me that really likes the idea of having something that's quite neutral, quite universal, could fit into my wardrobe quite comfortably, and so as such I was taking a look for maybe a slightly more neutral or grayscale palette, and stumbled across a yarn combination at one of my favourite UK based hand dyers websites. Hedgerow Yarns has an Etsy shop. She is the most beautiful speckler of yarns. She has some gorgeous bases. She is just incredibly adept at the work that she does. And as such, when I popped in there, I spotted that she had a couple of skeins that actually played really nicely together. So these are the skeins that I picked up. This skein on this side is her Silky Yak base. It is a 4-ply of superwash merino, 60% superwash merino, 20% silk and 20% yak, and with 100 grams is 366 meters. It is beautifully soft. It is this amazing natural kind of heathered grey in colour. I believe actually Andrea Mowry's original sample was knit in a yak base. It's the yak single from Ching Fibres, whereas this is a plied base, but still you've got this amazingly beautiful slightly marled grey coming through, and it's lovely and soft as well. And then on this side you have her Suri silk cloud base, which is 74% baby Suri alpaca and 26% mulberry silk, and at 50 grams that comes in at 300 meters. I will hold them up for you to appreciate their beauty side by side. The camera's adjusting slightly to try and make sense of this beautiful natural colour. Both of these are natural coloured bases, and as such I thought they just played really nicely together. So yes, these are my starters for 10 with the pink velvet, but it's fair to say that, you know, while I really enjoyed the kind of more neutral colour, I just wanted to explore other potential options. I have quite a few 4-ply sweater quantities in my stash at the moment, but corresponding mohair was perhaps a little bit, not mohair, sorry, corresponding Suri alpaca was something that I was a little bit thin on the ground for. So I also looked at another UK based yarn dyer who is Loom Yarns. Again, she has an Etsy site. I will put her details up here on the screen, and came away with a couple of options from there. I mean, part of me really quite likes how they look together, although it's a little bit of an abstract colour combination. This is, again, it's her Suri silk base, 74% baby Suri alpaca and 26% mulberry silk, again 50 grams to 300 meters. This colourway here is white peach and this is Monstera, and again really beautiful. So I've got a couple of more kind of olivey green sweater quantities down here that I thought, again, there could be quite a nice low contrast option with this, which, yeah, I might have a play around and take a look at that. Similarly, I've got some kind of nice sort of blouse pink colorways or even slightly more winey reds that this might work with quite nicely, or indeed this might go quite well with the grey, for instance. There are plenty of options. So yeah, definitely room to play around in the stash. But in the meantime, I'm entirely happy to have these guys come and just hang out for a little bit and see how we get on. So yes, a couple of nice combinations there for the pink velvet sweater. Definitely something that I want to give a little bit more time and thought to. I mean, of course, I could end up going with gold, and there's nothing to say I won't, because, you know, for all that you may sniff at me, you will not get a rise out of me. I like gold, and I'm sticking to that. But I think it's also fair to say that when it comes to just looking at my options, I'm having quite a lot of fun playing around with those as well. So yes, a couple of interesting colour combinations there. Definitely some that are a little bit left field, a little bit against the grain perhaps, but I think it's fair to say that I reckon those could work quite nicely. And similarly, it's also lovely just to be checking out some new dyers. Loom, for instance, is a dyer that's new to me, and just playing around in that shop, it just brought me so much joy. So yes, definitely worth taking a look there. And also, if you can right now, going out and supporting some of your local makers or some of your favourite makers with their online stores. Obviously, there are some fairly severe restrictions on our infrastructure at the moment, but anything that we are able to do to support small businesses at this point in time, I am sure will go a very, very long way indeed. So if you can, and if you would like to, definitely something that is worth considering, and something that I'm more than happy to give you a little free pass over as well. Moving along into Vicarious knitting this week, there are a few patterns that have caught my eye and a few things of yours that have definitely given rise to me just getting very excited about your projects all over again. The first pattern that caught my eye over the last couple of weeks, I have waxed lyrical about Sari Nordland's patterns for the longest time. It's genuinely getting to the point where it's a little bit needy and a little bit embarrassing now, if I'm being completely honest. So, you know, I feel faintly ashamed about this, and yet here we are. She has a new sweater pattern that she has released called the Aua pullover, I think, assuming it's pronounced as the German name Aua would be. I believe it's a river in Germany. It may well not be, but I will include her pattern picture here, pronunciation notwithstanding. This is a beautiful pullover. It's a little bit oversized. It's got that slight kind of balloon sleeve or kind of batwing sleeve element to it. It's incredibly flattering and just the sort of cozy thing that my autumn wardrobe is absolutely going to be crying out for. It's as with a lot of these beautiful sort of slightly drop sleeve raglan jumpers, it is knit in fingering weight yarn held together with a lace weight, probably a mohair, to make it really kind of lovely and cozy and soft. But the detail of construction and some of the details she has on the sleeves really just elevates it. And as with all of Sari's designs, it is simple and elegant and timeless and just everything that I'm going to sit here and rave about quite gently. The sizing for Sari's patterns is always pretty great as well. This particular sweater ranges in size from a 38-inch bust up to a 70-inch bust, but that does include a good few inches of ease in there as well. So I believe she recommends somewhere between 7 to 10 inches of ease. And also, because it is a raglan shaped sweater, she gives you some really helpful notes in her project page and kind of pattern overview page on Ravelry about sizing. So she includes the original bust sizes for the intended sizing. So in other words, she will give you the actual bust size and then the size that she would recommend. But if you want to knit it with perhaps more or less ease, I personally would probably go for a little bit less ease, not zero ease, not negative ease, but certainly somewhere closer to the kind of 3 to 4 inch ease mark, just because that's my personal preference. But yes, again, her sizing, her notes around it are incredibly helpful there too. One last thing to bear in mind is that Sari through the month of April is offering a 20% discount on her patterns. Now, this is not a promotion in that sense, although I will confess that when I spotted that, I did take advantage of it. There's no code that's necessary. It's during the month of April, so you've got another few days to be able to take advantage of that. She has some absolute beauties. I've mentioned some of them here in the past, or indeed over on the Knitting Vicariously thread on Ravelry. Certainly her pullover is one of my favourites. I've mentioned Sylvia, that's not included in the offer. It's not a self-published pattern. Sylvia is already free because just craziness. But yes, definitely worth heading on over there and seeing if there's anything of hers that is self-published that takes your fancy. Another pattern that's caught my eye this week, and this time it's about colour and texture. It is just such a fun, bright, beautiful pattern. This is the Homecoming cardigan by Shay Johnson. I'll include her pattern picture here. It is everything that this time and period in the world is not. It is bright and colourful and just full of so much positivity that I love it, and it brings a smile to my face every time I see this pop up in Instagram. It is knit and worsted weight. It is just such a beautiful ray of, as I say, just colour and beautiful texture in this pattern, and I think if you're looking at cardigan patterns, this one is a great one to take a look at. It uses some really interesting techniques. I know that mosaic knitting is pretty big at the moment. This is a way of knitting colour work without actually having to hold the yarn in two hands or switching between colours on the same row. Instead, what you do is you slip stitches and alternate the colours that you knit with on each row. So if that's something that's new to you and you want to give it a try, definitely worth taking a look at this pattern as well. Sizing is pretty broad for this as well. It starts at a 34-inch bust and goes up to a 62-inch bust. As part of that, you would be able to get a fair bit of playroom with some of the ease in there if you want something that's a bit more oversized or potentially a little bit more closely fitted as well. And again, worsted weight means it should hopefully knit up pretty quickly and be pretty darn cozy once it's there as well. So yes, if this is a cardigan that floats your boat and you're in the mood for something that is bright, punchy, and generally positive, this is definitely one that should be taking a look at in the near future. And the last pattern I want to share with you this time round had my attention drawn to it by a fantastic viewer of ours over in the Ravelry thread, Trudy Trouble. Excellent Ravelry name, mentioned a couple of patterns, one of which was this beautiful unboxing sweater by Hannah Maciejewska, which is how I'm going to butcher that particular name, apologies, but this is a textured sweater and therefore has my number all over it, and it's just stunning. Part of the thing that really drew me to it, again because apparently it's on the brain at the moment, is the fact that this particular project is knit in this amazing kind of heathery, slightly grainy colour base, and again that is a yak base. It's got a little bit of the natural grey of the yak in there, which just gives it so much depth. It is beautiful. It is a fingering weight sweater. I do have a yak sweater quantity, but it's DK, so that wouldn't quite work for this. It is the yarn that you can see along here, which I brought back from Edinburgh Yarn Festival just over a year ago now. That's Martin's Lab in the Tibetan Yak DK, which is lovely, but obviously slightly too thick a weight for this sweater. But you know, ideas, formulating, all that good stuff. But yes, this sweater is just gorgeous. Sizing again is pretty broad for this. It goes from a size 41 bust up to 73. That may seem like quite an upper end scale of the range, but it is intended to be worn with around 7 inches of ease, so worth bearing that in mind as you size it. Again, ease is something that you can play around with. What the designers tend to do is they will give you a view as to what the recommended ease is for it to fit in the way that they intend it to. Sometimes the styling of patterns will be done slightly differently. I know that the designer for this particular sweater mentions in the pictures she uses for her pattern page, it's actually about 8.5 inches of ease. all of that is a really great way of being able to get a view in your own mind as to what sort of ease you want to knit and assume when you're working up this pattern. Similarly, it's part of the reason I adore the Ravelry project pages, because you can go in and see these sweaters on all different sizes and shapes with all different amounts of ease that have been built in as well, and it's something I enjoy doing when I'm planning for a project. I'm always incredibly grateful to people who provide that level of detail in their pages too. And while this is a drop shoulder shape, the good news is the tags here would suggest that it is still knit from the top down, and so this might actually be a drop shoulder sweater that I actually pull my finger out and get to, because we know how I feel about bottom up sweaters. They are challenging at best for me and my limited attention span, but this certainly looks like something that I might just be able to get my teeth into. And so that's it from my pattern picks this time round. The good news is that you too have been doing some fairly sterling work throughout lockdown, and as such there are some amazing actual knits for us to just take a little peruse of over in the Show Us Your Actual Knits thread from our Ravelry group. The first of those is a pattern that I talked about a few weeks ago, and I'm delighted to see that it has been knit up to an absolutely just stellar standard, and so sharing it here. This is the Tsubaki pullover that I mentioned a couple of episodes back. The pattern is by Hiroko Fukatsu and it has been knit by the wonderful Buzzer Knits, and this blue, honestly this beautiful cornflower blue, it stopped me dead in my tracks before I'd even seen the sweater itself and the cabling on it. Then I saw the cabling, fell in love with that again. Then I realised it was one I'd already talked about, and there was a moment, it was beautiful. You should have been there and witnessed it, but you weren't. But that's okay, because that would have been creepy and weird. Anyway, this just stopped me dead in my tracks. It is such a stunning example of this sweater, such a beautiful colour, and knit absolutely to perfection. So massive congratulations on this, Buzzer Knits. It is beautiful, and I hope you have a huge amount of joy in wearing it, because I covet it gently. The second sweater to catch my eye this time round, and it is another sweater, because I have sweaters on the brain. There are some beautiful shawls in that thread. There are some incredible socks in that thread. I will confess that the ones I'm sharing with you this week are all sweaters, because I have sweaters on the brain, and I will be knitting other things at some point, I am quite sure, but right now it's just, my brain's just not there. But the second pattern I wanted to call out, project that I wanted to call out this time round, is another Sorrel pullover. Indeed, this is Bertific's Sorrel pullover. Again, the pattern is by Wool and Pine, but this is her version. In her version of gold, as she put it. Blues are very much her jam, and so as such, this is just perfection. It's such a beautiful fade from top through to bottom. The colour looks beautiful on you, and the blues that you've chosen and that you've picked out the whole way through it really do bring the whole piece together. So congratulations on a stunning project, and yeah, I really only hope that my sorrel looks as good on me as yours clearly does on you. And last but not least, we have a trio of sweaters in the same pattern, because there is nothing like seeing these sweaters on one person for me to go, oh, I really like that. And then two, for me to go, I want that. And three, just to make me downright needy. I mean, really, this is the Wool and Honey sweater by Andrea Mowry. Now, it's not a pattern that's particularly new, but it is one that just keeps just making its way into the very back dark recesses of my brain as being something that at some point I really do quite want to knit. And funnily enough, not the top shelf there, the next shelf down, this lovely slightly greenish yellow, still in the gold family, don't worry, but this, I've earmarked that potentially for a Wool and Honey at some point. This is that's Easy Knits Squidge, I think, in just the most beautiful punchy yellow colour, and that might need to be a thing at some timing is of the essence, clearly. But the three sweaters that caught my eye, the first of these is my fabulous friend Claire, who is Transient Meow, looking entirely resplendent here in her own sort of beautiful golden orange version. I'm still bringing it into the golden family. It's leaning, it's kind of cousin once removed territory, but we can incorporate it, it's fine. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful sort of burnt orange colour here that suits Claire so perfectly. Really gorgeous example on this. I've been watching her working on this in a couple of the Instagram photos that she shared, and it's just wonderful to see it finished and about her excellent person. The second version is truly golden. We can absolutely bring this into the golden family, and this particular version has been knit by someone whose Ravelry name is giving me true consternation, but I'm going to go with Madka Ilya Kirpu. I mean, who knows? Clearly Finnish people know, and all those who speak Finnish, and I am definitely not amongst those ranks. Apologies if I have caused international diplomacy shattering offence in my attempt at that. But I would genuinely quite like to know how on earth I pronounce that, because it's an amazing name and there's a lot more consonants in there than I was expecting. But yes, it is a gorgeous sweater. It's one where she posted this beautiful flat lay picture. I tapped into it, I could see it about her and about her person, and it is stunning. So again, just a wonderful way of being able to see how a pattern can look so different in different sizes, on different bodies, and knit to different levels of ease. Just really, really enjoyed seeing your version knit up there too. And then last but not least, we have another gold adjacent once removed, slightly more in the burnt orange family, from T. Dolev here, who is just such a prolific knitter of beautiful sweaters and beautiful patterns. This, again, as you can see, is her version of it here, and it's just absolutely stunning. Looking through your notes, I know you had a little bit of a dilemma with your yarn matching and seeing slightly different colours coming through on different skeins, but honestly, I would say from the pictures that you've shared, it looks beautiful, and really not something I spotted at all until I read your notes in a bit more detail, so rest assured your secret is entirely safe. But yes, hopefully you have enjoyed seeing a few of those different sweaters on a few different folks with a few different colours, and just, yeah, it really is one of those sweaters that I just really need to get my thumb out and actually finally knit it, because it is beautiful. So hopefully that has given you a little food for thought and a chance for you to maybe have a bit of a think about things that are maybe just kind of still on your to knit list. I mean, if ever there were a time for us to throw caution to the wind and really just get on with things, it is probably during lockdown. And I mentioned last time round, this was absolutely not a time where I was considering just focusing on whips. I was just happy to throw caution left, right, and very much centre. So if that's something that you want to get a bit more involved in and you need an excuse to do so, I mean, I'm happy to take accountability. It's not even blamed underknit season, but I will gladly take that burden off your hands for you. But that is pretty much it for this week's episode. I mentioned I'm going to try and crack on and really knuckle down with a few more of the things that I have in the works just now before I cast on anything else. We'll see how long that resolve lasts. But in the meantime, as ever, I really do hope you are staying safe, staying healthy, and as much as you possibly can, staying indoors as part of that as well. So I will be back in a couple of weeks' time, but in the meantime, I hope you have a truly wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, but if for whatever reason it isn't right now, I hope you have the opportunity to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on now more than ever, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye. So it's fair to say this week that I'm feeling a tiny bit bitter about my inability to score any flour whatsoever in any of the supermarkets. This has been going on for a good 4 weeks now. Is there any strong white bread flour to be found in any postcode, in any proximity to my own? No. No, there is not, because every fucker under the sun is making sourdough and is posting about it on Instagram, and if that's you, please don't take it personally. I mean no offence, I'm just very bitter. Not sour, like the dough, just bitter. It's fine, it's fine. Look, I am completely and utterly over it. There is absolutely nothing about the situation that is playing on my mind. April, and indeed it's a little bit warm and toasty over here. I think we can all agree it's getting a little bit tired and stale now. We're deep. Although, in spite of that, I have been on a little bit of a knitting roll in the sense that this one that we have sandwiched in here, we've all been loafing around a little bit, and I think it's fair to say that my plans for those have gone slightly awry because you will not get a rise out of me. I like gold. Definitely some that are a little bit left field, a little bit against the grain perhaps. It's genuinely getting to the point where it's a little bit needy and a little bit embarrassing now. Okay, fine. Maybe it's stuck in my head a little bit. I mean, some of those puns were pretty poor because, I mean, I'm sorry, you deserve butter. I mean better.